जन्म तेरा बातों ही बीत गयो जन्म तेरा बातों ही बीत गयो जन्म तेरा बातों ही बीत गयो तूने कब हुनराम कहो रे तूने कब हुन कृष्ण कहो जन्म तेरा बातों ही बीत गयो जन्म तेरा बातों ही बीत गयो 5 बरस का भूल रे भाला 5 बरस का भूल रे भाला अब तो 20 भयो अब तो 20 भयो मगर बची सी माया कारण देश विदेश गयो जन्म तेरा बातों ही बीत गयो तीस बरस की जब मति उपजी नित नित लोभ नयो नित नित लोभ नयो माया जोड़ी लाख करोड़ी आज हुन तृप्त भयो
Namaste, my dear brothers and sisters, boys and girls. That was a two-in-one in the melodious voice of Soumya Narayanan, a former student of the Mothers International School. She gave you two devotional songs. The first one was closely related to our topic, the purpose of life, and what she brought out was that our whole life passes in something other than addressing the true purpose of life. When we are children, we are too young to understand it, to think of it. When we are a little older, we get so preoccupied with things which are more concrete, visible, and palpable, like taking care of our career and family and accumulating wealth. And if we are able to make both ends meet very easily, then we start thinking in terms of name and fame and power and prestige. And the result is that the one thing that gets neglected in every phase of life is addressing the true purpose of life. And by the time we realize it, we are too old to do much. The second one was based on a few couplets by Kabir, a spiritual seeker, one might even say perhaps he was a spiritual master, who came up with many very perceptive couplets which give an indication of the spiritual progress he had made, and that was in spite of not being formally highly educated or anything. He had got there through the path of devotion. And I know some of the things that he says are that the truth can be bitter, but all the same it must be said. And what he was criticizing was the emphasis that we lay on the outer symbols of our religions rather than the underlying deeper truths. So with that little introduction, we now move on to today's topic, that is the purpose of life. Today will be the second session on that. Last time we saw how the purpose of life can be addressed. And today what we shall see is what are the difficulties that might come our way while trying to address the genuine purpose of life, which is spiritual growth, and how we can handle those difficulties, and in some cases even convert those difficulties and obstacles into opportunities for further addressing the purpose of life. The love and blessings of the Mother and Sri Aurobindo to all of you from Sri Aurobindo Ashram Delhi branch. The YES program is a part of the celebrations of the 150th birth anniversary of Sri Aurobindo and the 75th anniversary of India's independence. Today we will have a look at the inevitable obstacles. Some obstacle or the other is likely to be faced by everybody on the spiritual path. So we'll have a look at some of the inevitable obstacles and how to deal with them. For recapitulation, we have these two poles of consciousness. One, the mental consciousness, which is a picture of reality based on what we can see and hear, that is sensory perception, coupled with past experience and logic. And whatever fits into this is what we accept as real, and the rest is discarded as if it does not exist and is purely a figment of imagination. The other pole is the mystic consciousness, which is aware of whatever we perceive at the mental level, but in addition to it, behind it, higher than that, deeper than that, and beyond it, the mystic consciousness can see another layer of reality, which in fact is the imperishable constant reality, in contrast with what we perceive at the mental level, which is perishable and always changing. It's inconstant. Most of us are somewhere on the wide spectrum between mental consciousness and mystic consciousness. We are neither at neither pole, and the purpose of life is to take a few steps from wherever we are towards the mystic consciousness. And we get in life several opportunities for doing so, to make use of those opportunities or to waste them is up to us. Not only we can waste those opportunities, we can also misuse those opportunities so that instead of moving in the right direction, we may end up taking a few steps in the wrong direction. That keeps happening to most of us, a few steps forwards, a few steps backwards. But then if we are conscious of this process, probably we'll take more steps forwards and thereby move closer to the goal in this very life. Essentially, all obstacles on the spiritual path are rooted in ignorance. Ignorance of not the type that can be removed by going to an ordinary school or college, but ignorance of the deeper truths of existence, which we have been talking about in the last few sessions, while we talked about the parts of the being, the spiritual worldview, and then in light of that, we tried to have a look at the genuine purpose of life, which is spiritual growth or growth of consciousness. And the ignorance of these deeper truths of existence forms the foundation of the obstacles that we come across. One might say that if one has understood this, then why those obstacles will be there? Those obstacles are inevitable, and they are there when we perceive them as obstacles because we are seekers, we are not yogis, we are not accomplished mystics, and therefore we are moving in that direction. But then, since we are not entirely there, we are somewhere on the way, we perceive them as obstacles rather than opportunities, and also we can feel discouraged by them. We can feel as if we have run into an insurmountable problem, but none of those is insurmountable if we once again turn to the same deeper truths of existence which we have been talking about, and in some cases we'll be able to use those obstacles, in fact, as opportunities for making further progress. Sometimes not immediately. Some of the obstacles can be preparation for the next phase where we will make that progress. Now, one of the much condemned and much maligned obstacles on the spiritual path is the ego. Ego is a sense of separation, and that is clearly rooted in the ignorance, because at the spiritual level we are all one, because the truest, the deepest reality of each one of us is exactly the same, and that is divinity. So in that sense we are all one, and therefore this sense of separation which the ego is about is an illusion, it's a piece of fiction. However, it's a very useful piece of fiction. Although it is widely condemned, it's a very useful piece of fiction, because without that not much would be accomplished in the world. And that is why, in fact, a child who has a very diffuse ego is encouraged to consolidate that ego, so that the child feels that if I work hard, this is what I can accomplish, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, a child also learns early in childhood that I have to control my ego. If the child says that I'll only bat, I won't bowl in cricket, then he knows that nobody will play with me. So if the child has to enjoy the game, the child has to follow the rules of the game, which essentially again is about controlling the ego. So both the things, using the ego properly and controlling it when necessary, are a part of the process of growing up. And what applies to the ordinary worldly life, in which the focus is on worldly achievements and accomplishments, when a person finds that that is not going to take me to the source of lasting happiness, and the person wants to give a new direction to his life, that again is a function of the ego. The person presses into service the same instrument that has helped him so far on the path of worldly achievements, and the person says, well, now I will give a new turn to my life, I will give a new direction to my life. I will give a new direction to my life once again involves an I, and it's the ego behind it. And in fact, the ego serves the person well even on the spiritual path for quite a long distance, and then finally comes the time when the person can feel that this ego is becoming an obstacle. When does that happen? When the person finds that further progress is being obstructed by my attachment to possessions and relationships. These are the two major hurdles which are rooted in the ego, relationships and possessions, and they are becoming an obstacle. And because of that, the person starts feeling uneasy, the person starts feeling restless. As you say in Hindi, chhatpatahat hone lagti hai. So that is the time to shed the ego. So the person knows when the person is prepared to eliminate the ego. Till then, he has been controlling it, it has been diminishing, and his fear of love has been widening. In that sense, many ego barriers have been broken, but the ego is not completely gone. And when the time comes, then the person knows it, and that is the time to shed it. It's something like a railway ticket. It's a precious piece of document till the journey has been performed. But when the journey is over, the ticket can be discarded and the person gets into a taxi. So the same thing happens here. The ego is useful till quite a long segment of the journey. When the time comes to shed it, it can be eliminated, and then person gets into another type of vehicle. So although the ego is maligned much, we should also understand that it has been planted there with a purpose, and it has a purpose not only in ordinary worldly life but also on the spiritual path. Closely related to ego are the desires. They are once again rooted in the ego, because when I say that I need more clothes, it is essentially to boost my ego, because I'll create a better impression on people if I have new clothes, better clothes, stylish clothes. Although I might already have in my cupboard enough clothes to last me the rest of my life. And therefore, the desires are essentially rooted in the ego rather than being genuine necessities. And how the desires can be an obstacle on the spiritual path? Because then we remain preoccupied with our struggle to satisfy those desires. If we can't satisfy them, then we are miserable because of that. And when we satisfy them, then satisfied desires have their own way of creating stress. So desires, whether satisfied or unsatisfied, keep creating all types of stress, which deflects us from the spiritual path. It also makes us neglect the needs of those around us. It makes it difficult for us to shower our love on those around us whose needs may be greater than ours. So that is how desires can become an important obstacle on the spiritual path. Closely related to desires are anger and depression. Desires can be of two types, either wanting objects or wanting to control somebody, control people around us. And in either case, if these desires are not satisfied, we don't get what we want, and nobody gets everything that the person wants, or we are not able to control the people in our sphere, then there are two types of reactions possible. One is anger and the other is depression. Both are closely related and are a symptom of inability to get what we want or inability to control people around us. Typically, in such situations, men tend to get angry and women tend to go into a depression. And the reason is that men usually have a soft target available. Even if a person can't get angry with the boss, then he comes home and gets angry with the wife. The typical story goes that the man could not get angry with the boss, then he got angry with the wife couldn't reply back, she got angry with the child, and then the child couldn't say anything to the mother, and he went out and hit a dog with a stone. So, the anger keeps getting displaced, but essentially it is the frustration which is being expressed through this anger because the person could not control somebody else's behavior. Now, since women have fewer targets, softer targets like that available, they tend to go into a depression. But essentially, they are two sides of the same coin. Now, once again, all these things can be, if they are seen in the right perspective, then the person would have needs which are higher than those of the body and the mind, and will not be disappointed by the failure to fulfill those desires. And also, the person will not feel the need to control others because the person will see the other not as somebody else, but also as a manifestation of the divine. And even if the person does not like something in that other person, the person would feel that, well, this person is also a manifestation of the divine, maybe imperfect, but then so am I. And it's also possible that this person may be differently imperfect, but that does not give me enough justification to be angry. So, and the person will, in any case, will have higher goals to pursue, and these minor irritants will cease to bring out these reactions like anger and depression, because the person has something much higher to look forward to. Once again, rooted in the ignorance are fear and anxiety, which are again two sides of the same coin. Fear is about something which we feel is going to harm us, but we can't do much about it. We find ourselves incapable of coping with it. And preoccupation with that can again become an obstacle on the spiritual path. On the other hand, anxiety is about what might possibly go wrong in the future. So it is a fear of something which has not yet happened, but we feel that it might happen. So essentially they are once again related. Fear is about something real right now, which we are finding difficult to cope with and is becoming an obstacle. And anxiety is about what all may go wrong in the future. Now once again, these are all rooted in ignorance, and we try to solve these things at a mental level. And in fact, sometimes trying to solve these things at the mental level becomes counterproductive, because when it comes to anxiety about things that might go wrong, there can be a million things that could go wrong. Probably most of them won't actually materialize, but that does not prevent our mind from working overtime and manufacturing more and more things that may go wrong. That becomes a sort of a habit. And at the mental level, nobody can give us a guarantee that those things will not actually happen. Although most of them will not actually materialize, but then there is no guarantee that they will not happen. And since that cannot be there, the person gets anxious, and they can reverberate in the mind and make the person feel more and more that I'm quite sure some of these things would actually happen. And with that type of preoccupation, again, there is a person doesn't have the time and energy for thinking in terms of the genuine purpose of life. Now, what is the way out? The way out is to go higher than the mind, because at the level of the mind, it is difficult to get that type of assurance and guarantee about being able to cope with a fear, or seeing in a dispassionate way at what all possibly could go wrong. Both these can be dealt with at a level higher than the mind, in the sense that no matter what happens, or no matter what is happening right now, let me see how I can use it as an opportunity for spiritual growth. So that is the only assurance that we have, because then you feel supported by a higher power, and you are in touch with that, you are in a communion with that power, and that is what helps overcome fear and anxiety, as no amount of intellectual exercise and reasoning and analysis can. Now, humility is a great virtue, and therefore it might appear surprising how it has been put as one of the obstacles. Humility is a great virtue if one realizes one's limitations, but humility can become an obstacle if the person feels that I am unfit to walk the spiritual path, or that my willpower is not strong enough, and therefore I am not really fit for it. Now, while confidence should not translate into overconfidence, at the same time, the confidence that yes, I can make a beginning, and of course the divine grace would help. With that sort of confidence, to make a beginning is not in any way inconsistent with that true humility, which makes us realize our limitations as well as our place in the universe as one little individual among millions of others. So, while that humility has a place, the confidence to start walking the path, make a beginning, realizing that our personal effort will not achieve much, no matter how capable we are. We'll need divine grace, but to earn that divine grace, this personal effort is necessary. So, with that confidence, one can make a beginning. At the same time, we should also realize our worth. We are potentially divine. That is our true worth. So long as realizing our true worth does not translate into arrogance, that is again quite acceptable. True worth, not only the sense of being potentially divine, but also being aware of what our unique talents and blessings and gifts are that have been given to us by the divine, and how we can put them to use. In fact, having any genuine talent and ability is not only something which has to be accepted with gratitude, but also has to be used in the right way. Because whether it is material wealth, or whether it's intellectual wealth, or it is any other type of gift like a sweet voice which enables the person to sing. Now, any of these unique gifts and talents are not only to be accepted with gratitude, but as the mother has said, one has to realize that one is not the owner of these gifts, one is a trustee. And that applies not only to wealth, where we feel that I am not the owner and therefore I should share it with others, but it applies also to other types of unique blessings. If the person can sing very well, she should see that she uses this talent to not only bring joy to others, but also communicate the right type of messages and consciousness to others. If the person has an intellectual wealth, again, use that to communicate what will help elevate the consciousness of those around us. Of course, there has to be that complementary situation. One can give what one has, and the person has these unique talents, but then the person can give them only to the person who needs it. So, when that complementary situation presents itself, that gift should be used. So, humility, the right type of humility and in right measure. That is what will help, but otherwise humility also can become an obstacle. So humility is not the same as inferiority complex. That is what we have to remember, and therefore we should have the confidence to walk the path and also realize our worth, our unique talents and gifts, and use them for our own spiritual growth and also for creating a better world. Like the need for food, there is also a need for sex to perpetuate the species, to keep the world going. And that is why it has been planted in us. But then it can assume different forms, and it can be a creative force as well as lead to a downfall. But on the whole, a certain amount of regulation by various types of ethical, moral principles as well as by law is something universal, because the pitfalls and the downfalls arising from the sex instinct are again a universal phenomenon. And that is why, in fact, Sri Aurobindo and the mother, while they have emphasized inner renunciation in case of other sensory pleasures, inner renunciation which is arrived at through a gradual process of enjoying those in moderation, enjoying those sensory pleasures in moderation, realizing that they are not a source of lasting happiness, and thereby leading to a progressive detachment, so that even if one continues to experience those sensory pleasures, one is not attached to them, one is not dependent on them for happiness, and with that detachment, outer renunciation will not be necessary, but to some extent will automatically follow. I mean, that is the approach that Sri Aurobindo and the mother have had for sensory pleasures in general. But in case of sex, they have been rather more clear that if you are on the spiritual path, particularly on the path of integral yoga, then sex, even subtle expressions of it, are not acceptable. And how can one give up anything which seems pleasant and enjoyable? By having a substitute which is even more enjoyable. And that is what the person finds when the person is on the spiritual path. When you have something higher and more enjoyable, something which brings joy and bliss rather than just ordinary happiness, then the person is willing to forget about, or rather easily forgets about, it sort of drops out from the person's life. So that can happen also to sex. Closely related to sex is marriage. Marriage, whether it is a happy marriage or an unhappy marriage, successful or unsuccessful, in either case, it can in fact facilitate the spiritual journey. If it is a happy and successful marriage, what it would mean is that the partners can stimulate each other's spiritual growth and thereby accelerate the process. That would be an ideal situation. Ideal situation is relatively uncommon. But then if the marriage is unsuccessful, what can happen is that as a result of this unsuccessful marriage, the person has a challenge to see in the partner the divine, and if the partner whom this person does not like or has conflicts with can be seen as a manifestation of the divine, anybody else can also be seen as a manifestation of the divine. Further, the person's happiness, if not found in marriage, then the person can expand his sphere of love and find greater joy, more durable joy in a wider sphere on which that love can be showered. And therefore, once again, this marriage which did not go well, instead of being a curse, turns into a blessing. It turns into a blessing because if the person did not have this unsuccessful marriage, how would this person have discovered the path which makes the person's happiness completely independent of external circumstances, including marriage? So, if the marriage becomes the trigger for discovering that path, then the marriage in fact turns into a blessing rather than a curse, this unsuccessful marriage. However, I may digress a bit here and point out one difficulty which is faced much more by women than by men. Because if the woman is spiritually inclined and wants to walk that path, but the husband is not, which happens quite often due to reasons which we'll come to soon, why within the same family it is generally the odd one out who wants to walk this path and the rest don't understand this person. We'll come to that but in the limited context of marriage, that can happen between partners too. And there, the women suffer more than the men because by and large the society is so organized and the difference in different parts of the world is more in degree than in kind. A man can more easily use the freedom that he has in society to start walking that path independently of the wife. But if the wife tries to do the same, then she faces a lot more opposition and obstacles. And that is perhaps one reason why women tend to be more sort of keen on walking that path, but most of the spiritual leaders happen to be men because they have had greater freedom if they were so inclined, and therefore they could emerge as leaders, whereas women just keep following it within the family in their own limited way. But then to say that because of that they are not making enough progress would be wrong, because even those difficulties and obstacles which the woman faces can also be turned into opportunities, and perhaps that is how they may be silently, in many cases, making a lot more progress than the men who move out and are more visibly on the spiritual path and become spiritual leaders. So that takes us to family ties and old friendships in general. And that can again become an obstacle Why that can happen is, say, let's take up friendships first. We may start with friendships in many different contexts. So let's take sort of the example of a group of boys and girls who went to the same school. 30 or 40 years later, some of them continue to maintain contact, but there may be an odd one out who was more spiritually inclined and started walking that path. Now, the interests and preoccupations that this person has become so different from those of his other friends that just one common factor, that they went to the same school, does not hold for this person enough fascination, and therefore he does not feel the necessity to continue with those relationships because his interests have changed, his preoccupations have changed, the type of topics they discuss are not the topics that interest this person. So just that one fact that they went to the same school 30 years ago does not become enough justification for continuing with those relationships. Now, in case of friends, that can be easily done because you can always create that distance. But in case of the family, if there is a similar situation, that becomes much more difficult because those are ties which cannot be undone. You cannot move closer and away as freely as you can in case of friendships, because the fact that the relationship exists is something undeniable. That is something which remains. And that is why both these can become difficulties, family ties even more than friendships. Let's try to understand this a little more because this is a very common phenomenon. Say like height and weight, if we take, say, the height and weight of different people, same age, same gender, everything, we would find that they don't have the same height or the same weight, and what statisticians do is to plot sort of a graph to show that the distribution of these things follows a bell-shaped distribution. It forms a bell. That is, the majority is somewhere in the middle. There's an average around which hovers the majority, but then there are always two extremes in which we have a small number. That applies also to the level of consciousness. So the majority is primarily concerned with the needs of the body and the mind, particularly the emotional part of the mind. So the life revolves around satisfying the physical and vital needs, and that is quite consistent with their level of consciousness. And in fact, the mother says these are the favorites of nature. They don't have to be looked down upon. They are the favorites of nature. They behave exactly as nature has constituted them. They don't have any serious, intense aspiration to move forwards from there. So one should not even try to disturb their balance. So that is what the majority is. But then we have the extreme at which the consciousness is much lower than that. Those are our criminals, antisocial elements. And then we have the other extreme where the consciousness is much higher than that of the majority. And these are our saints and sages who are keen on walking the spiritual path. Now the fact is that the chance of a person who is at that level or the higher end of the spectrum, the chances are that this person will be surrounded by a large number within the family, among friends, at the workplace, by people who are at the level of the majority. So that is how these difficulties develop, and in the majority there may be many who are genuinely the well-wishers of this person, but yet he finds that there are difficulties not only because of the types of interests they have and the type of topics that they are interested in talking about, but he also has sometimes difficulties because he keeps making choices in life which they can't understand. This person makes choices which arise at the level of the psychic being. The psychic being gives choices which are based on love, and love does not calculate. Love essentially looks at which need is more important rather than whose need it is. So this person does things which satisfy the needs of those around him because the person gets from that immense joy and lasting mental peace. That is what we have seen is the result of following the voice of the psychic being. So the person gets immense joy and lasting mental peace. But then in the worldly sense, he loses. He may lose money, he may lose time. And when people around him who are his well-wishers find that this person is losing money and losing time, then they start telling him, you are stupid. And if this person does not listen and goes on doing, they say that he's not only stupid, he's also arrogant. He thinks everybody else is wrong, only he is right. Everybody is telling him the same thing, still he doesn't listen. But the difference is because this person is getting that joy, this person is getting lasting happiness, the person is escaping that sense of guilt and recurrent uneasiness, and the person is getting a sense of fulfillment. Now, these are all things which are within this person and they cannot be measured. You can't say that his level of consciousness has gone up by 2 kilometers. Whereas the money that the person loses, you can say that his bank balance has gone down by 2000. So that can be measured, but the joy that he got can't be measured. We can't say that I got 2 kilos of joy. So joy can't be measured, peace can't be measured, the change in the level of consciousness can't be measured, and but as what he is losing is visible to everybody and can be measured. And therefore, we say sometimes one half of the world doesn't understand the happiness of the other. So that is where the misunderstanding arises. So therefore, this person becomes the odd one out, considered stupid, eccentric, aloof, and sometimes snobbish because he doesn't listen to anybody or doesn't want to talk to anybody, avoids everybody's company. So the person becomes the odd one out. And people start sometimes misunderstanding, they feel that this person has a superiority complex. The result is he may get isolated because after all, how long can you keep sort of breaking your head against this person who doesn't listen to anybody? And the majority can always dispense with a few such odd individuals. So this person gets isolated. And this person feels that if everybody thinks that I am stupid or I am wrong, probably I may be, because this person is still on the path. The person has not reached that point where he has that supreme confidence that I am right, and therefore the person may start having doubts. Now, what is the way out? Firstly, look within. Look within rather than outside, and try and see whether the aspiration is sincere, whether the choices are really being made at the level of the psychic being, and we have seen how one can judge those things. So look within and assess your own attitude, the sincerity and intensity of your aspiration, and whether the choices are actually being made at the level of the psychic being, or one is cheating oneself. The choices are being at the level of the ego, and the person thinks that it's being made at the level of the psychic being, because those mistakes can happen. So look within rather than find faults with those around us. While dealing with others, but at the same time one has to be humble, which means one may not interact much, but whatever interaction is there should not give any feeling to the others that this person thinks that I am superior. So one should be humble, and there is a rationale for that. Now here you find that there are on the left hand side you find there's a curve. There are two people, A and B. The level of consciousness, if it can be measured, and it has been measured by David Hawkins, we talked about him a few days back. He has tried to measure and quantify consciousness, and it is the highest is 1000. So I've used that sort of a scale. Suppose there are two people, A and B. The level of consciousness of A is 210 and B is 240. And much of the mankind hovers around this 200. So these people are within the majority, but at the same time B is at a little slightly higher than A. But really there is no justification for B feeling vastly superior to A. There are a few much lower than the majority and a few much higher than, but these are both within the majority, but one is a little higher than the other. On the right hand side, the same data has been presented differently. You can see that there instead of 0 to 1000 on the y-axis, you have only from 200 to 260. So on that scale, if you try to show 210 and 240, then you get the difference like A and B. So a narrow view of looking at the same thing can give us a very different perception, and that's what may make B feel that I'm vastly superior to A. In science, sometimes if we try to represent data like that, the way it has been shown on the right side, it's considered sort of cheating. fraudulent presentation of data, because you are trying to magnify a small difference, make it appear big. So you're trying to give a wrong impression. But we do that so often when it comes to the level of consciousness. The person B genuinely starts feeling that I'm vastly superior to A. Another way of looking at the same thing, A and B. Once again, B is at a slightly higher level, 240 as compared to A. Now, how has A reached where A is and how has B reached where B is? As a result of the progress made in a large number of previous lives. So the person started at more or less the level of an animal consciousness, although he was human in form, and then through some sort of trial and error in some life took a few steps forward, in some steps a few steps backwards, and finally in this life, when A and B are in contact with each other, this is their present level of consciousness. They'll both continue probably on the same lines, and then they will reach a certain level of consciousness at which they'll become aware of the true purpose of life, and then they'll be pursuing the yoga or they'll walk the spiritual path consciously. So instead of unconscious yoga, now it will become conscious evolution or conscious yoga. Yoga in fact is conscious evolution. So they'll be on that path. After that the progress will be much faster. But right now that is where A and B are, and it is through the prism of ego and ignorance, ego being rooted in ignorance, that B thinks I am vastly superior to A. But actually, B was also more or less at the same place as A few lives ago, and A could be at the same place where B is today a few lives later. So really there is no essential difference. Not only that, depending upon how they use their lives, after a few lives A could be at a level much higher than B. That could also happen. The relationship could change completely. So if one views it from that perspective, once again, it's very easy to be humble. So the first thing is, while dealing with others, be humble in view of the larger truths which in fact will make us humble rather than feel arrogant because of what we are doing. So the first thing is be humble. And one of the ways one can express this humility is by laughing at yourself. So if somebody says that you are stupid, just stupid, I'm an idiot. So that is how you can laugh at yourself and lose no opportunity to point out your own defects and laugh at yourself in interactions with others, while dealing with others. Thirdly, be understanding. That is, understand the other person, and we have tried to see how if we truly try to understand the other person from the spiritual point of view, from the point of view of those deeper truths of existence, it is very easy to have no superiority complex and have a very charitable and generous view of the other person. And once again, this picture shows same thing from a different light. Now these are 3 or 4 people trying to climb up a hill, and some are at a slightly higher level than the other, and this they may start feeling that I am at a higher level, but if you look at the peak, compared to the distance that they still have to go, there is hardly any difference. But still, looking at it from a narrow angle, they may start feeling that I am better than the other person. The same hill, how does it look when one is, say, in an aeroplane on the right hand side, flight? Now, to this person, if he tries to look at these 3 people, if at all he is able to see, it will make no difference. Not only this, he will not be able to make out any difference between 3 people, he will see a very large number of other people on the same journey, taking different paths, trying to go towards the same peak, and to him it will be just a very large number of people on slightly different paths, on different routes, at different stages of climbing the peak. This person in the flight can't really, sees no difference between them and doesn't feel one is in any way superior to the other. So the person who is at a higher level of consciousness has that higher and broader view of things where these differences disappear. Now it is easy for the person who is in the plane, flying in the plane, to take that view. It is difficult for the people who are actually climbing at the bottom to take that view. So this person at the higher level can justify his higher level only if he can have a good understanding of the people who are climbing. You do not expect the people who are climbing to have a good understanding of the person who's flying at the top. So it is the person who is genuinely on the spiritual path, it's his duty to understand the others. He should not expect that others should understand him. So that is why it is important that he should not feel. So if they do not understand him, he should take it as natural that he is being misunderstood. It is he who has to understand them. That is why in that famous prayer of Saint Francis of Assisi, he says that, Lord, grant that I may understand, I may seek to understand more than to be understood. So dealing with others, be humble, laugh at yourself, be understanding, understand others. Accept things as they are. Because you can't change others. However, if you accept things as they are, you can use the people around you as opportunities for spiritual growth. Love them even if you do not like them. The two are different. You may not agree with everything that they do or say or think, but still one can love them because they are also manifestations of the divine. So everybody can be loved even if everybody need not be liked. And then also when you will see that it is give and take, in the sense that these people around us are giving us an opportunity for spiritual growth. So they are also giving us something. And same time, we have an opportunity to give. They are giving us. We also have an opportunity to give. Maybe our company, if given in the right way, will give them a little push, make them progress in this life a little more, a little faster. So it's give and take which is going on even amongst people who have some friction and differences. Do not try to change others. Any conscious efforts to change others generally fail. We'll see that in greater detail when we talk of stress management, because very often we feel we blame somebody else for our stress and we try to change that person, but that seldom works. Then be ready for the price. The price of having the majority of people around us at a certain level of consciousness is a certain degree of isolation. Therefore, one can't have it both ways. Be very friendly with a very large number of people around us and yet be comfortable with them and also keep walking the spiritual path. One has to be ready for a certain degree of isolation. But then that isolation can be broken by forging new relationships, because you may not have a close relationship with all those who went with you to school or college 20 years ago. But then now you'll have a different set of people around you who probably are more like you at a similar level of consciousness. One can forge a new relationships, which means that you end up moving from one set of relationships to others which are guided more by the level of consciousness than by such links as blood, marriage, going to the same school, having gone to the same school, living in the same neighborhood, and so on and so forth. And these are relationships which can be called spiritual relationships or spiritual partnerships. So these spiritual partnerships can create for us a spiritual family. It becomes a new family which is bound, which feels united, primarily because they can see in one another the same divine and they are walking the same path. And the last resort is that in some cases one might create a distance. Create a distance, geographical distance, distance in terms of infrequent communication, but that should always be the last resort, but that can be done. In some cases more easily than in others, more easily in case of friendships, more difficult in case of relationships, but all the same it can be done. One might say, but why is it so? Why are we placed in the company of so many who are so different from us, why and don't understand us? Why couldn't we be with similar people? Yes, we can be, and that is how spiritual families are built up. But then in the real world, it does happen. And when we blame the family and friendships too much, sometimes we are blaming external factors much more than we should. The real obstacles actually are within, that is the ego and the desires and the anxiety and the fear and the depression that we talked about, they all arise within. rather than outside. So the more important thing is to deal with the enemies, the obstacles, the hurdles within, rather than keep blaming what is outside us. And that is what you'll listen in this set of two songs, again a two-in-one, in this video break. Again a long session, so we can have a break. Instead of a tea break, we can go for a video break now.
क्या करूं क्या ना करूं ये आपदा हर बार है, क्या करूं क्या ना करूं ये आपदा हर बार है। एक तरफ है घर मेरा, एक तरफ गुरु का द्वार है, क्या करूं क्या ना करूं ये आपदा हर बार है। घर में मेरे है पिता माता है बंधु और सखा, घर में मेरे है पिता माता है बंधु और सखा, पर गुरु के चरण में जी मेरा घर बार है। एक तरफ है घर मेरा, एक तरफ गुरु का द्वार है, एक तरफ है घर मेरा, एक तरफ गुरु का द्वार है, क्या करूं क्या ना करूं ये आपदा हर बार है। जी करे मेरा यहीं पर मैं जीऊं यहीं मरूं, जी करे मेरा यहीं पर मैं जीऊं यहीं मरूं। माँ के आंसू पर बुलाते कैसी ये मझधार है। एक तरफ है घर मेरा, एक तरफ गुरु का द्वार है, एक तरफ है घर मेरा, एक तरफ गुरु का द्वार है, क्या करूं क्या ना करूं ये आपदा हर बार है। कहे कवि अरे मूढ़ मत क्यों है तू यूं उलझा रहा, कहे कवि अरे मूढ़ मत क्यों है तू यूं उलझा रहा, जब गुरु है तेरे संग तब क्या है घर क्या बार है। हर तरफ गुरु का ही घर, हर तरफ गुरु का द्वार है, हर तरफ गुरु का ही घर, हर तरफ गुरु का द्वार है। This song is about a universal dilemma that confronts serious spiritual seekers so often. On one hand, they are attached to the biological family which loves them, the family that they too love. But it is the same cherished relationships that become an obstacle on the spiritual path. It is not easy for the seeker to decide whether to continue staying close to the family or to turn to the wider and deeper sublime world which her guru has opened up for her. The seeker is finally told in the last stanza that the guru resides everywhere. Therefore, the seeker's conflict is just an unnecessary complexity created by her confused intellect. The conflict between family duties and spiritual pursuits is sometimes exaggerated. It comes in as a handy excuse, while the real problem is the weakness of the seeker's willpower. The next song highlights this inner conflict that is even more powerful as an obstacle on the spiritual path than the biological family. This obstacle is the conflict within, the conflict between different parts of the being. The emotions pull us towards what feels good but may not be really good, while the intellect, which guides us through reasoning, may push us in a different direction. Although reason is a good tool, it is an indecisive tool because it can justify everything. But the most authentic guide, the best and infallible guide, is the soul. The soul that sings its clear song through its spokesperson, the psychic being. When we have the ever delightful soul with us, why get bothered by the conflict between feelings and reason? When the master trainer, the soul, is with us, why get troubled by the conflict between feelings and reason, which are mere tools under training, says the poet in the song. क्या करूं क्या ना करूं ये आपदा हर बार है, क्या करूं क्या ना करूं ये आपदा हर बार है। एक तरफ है मन मेरा, एक तरफ आत्मा नाद है। एक तरफ है मन मेरा, एक तरफ आत्मा नाद है। क्या करूं क्या ना करूं ये आपदा हर बार है। दिल में मेरे काम क्रोध राग द्वेष का वार है। दिल में मेरे काम क्रोध राग द्वेष का वार है। पर आत्मा की शरण में ही जी मेरा उद्धार है। एक तरफ है मन मेरा, एक तरफ आत्मा नाद है। एक तरफ है मन मेरा, एक तरफ आत्मा नाद है। क्या करूं क्या ना करूं ये आपदा हर बार है। दिल करे खाऊं पीऊं दलीलों की भरमार है। दिल करे खाऊं पीऊं दलीलों की भरमार है। जज्बाती आंसू बुलाते कैसी ये मझधार है। एक तरफ है मन मेरा, एक तरफ आत्मा नाद है। एक तरफ है मन मेरा, एक तरफ आत्मा नाद है। क्या करूं क्या ना करूं ये आपदा हर बार है। कहे कवि अरे मूढ़ मत क्यों है तू यूं उलझा रहा। कहे कवि अरे मूढ़ मत क्यों है तू यूं उलझा रहा। जब सदानंद तेरे संग क्या दिल क्या दिमाग है। वो तो है शागिर्द कल के, आत्मा तो उस्ताद है। वो तो है शागिर्द कल के, आत्मा तो उस्ताद है।
So that was a break and an explanatory break. And the explanations accompanied the song, so I need not spend any further time on those. So we saw that while family and friendships can be an obstacle, but firstly, it is exaggerated as compared to the conflicts within, which are far more important to deal with. And secondly, these conflicts can also be used as opportunities rather than be considered obstacles which cannot be overcome. Now we go beyond these obstacles. Illness. Illness again can be both an obstacle and an opportunity. It can be an obstacle because whether it is ordinary life or whether it is spiritual life, in either case we live this life with the help of our instruments, which is our body-mind complex. And if the body has been or the mind has been affected by an illness, if this complex of our instruments, the body and the mind, has been impaired by an illness, it becomes difficult to carry out any type of duties, the type of work which may be required, including the work that is required on spiritual life. And therefore it can become an obstacle. However, it has been seen that in fact really serious incurable illnesses like cancer can be converted, at least by a select few, into opportunities, and they treat it as a sort of a advance notice for the inevitable. We have to leave this world one day, and they treat the disease like in cancer is treated by these people as an advance notice, as a warning that has come, and after that they undergo a major change in the way they look at life, and the result is that they not only remain no more preoccupied with the illness, they don't remain preoccupied with themselves, but now they become more loving, more caring to the people around them, and they start mending relationships. Anyone whom they have hurt, they are very quick to apologize to that person. Anyone who hurt them, they are very quick to tell that person that all has been forgiven. And the others are also nice to them because they feel that this person may not be around for long. And the result is, in the few years that they live, they not only grow spiritually more than they did in several decades of their ordinary normal, so-called normal life, but they also end up stimulating the spiritual growth of a large number of friends, contacts, caregivers, and so on. So they sweeten the surroundings as they negotiate the illness. And interestingly, not only they use the illness as an opportunity, the remainder of their life, which they are using very well, itself gets longer. So while using the remainder well, they prolong the remainder itself. We can talk about that sometime later if there will be an opportunity to talk about illnesses. But one person who has put together a lot of literature of this type is available through his very popular paperbacks. He's a cancer surgeon called Bernie Siegel, and two of his best known works are Peace, Love and Healing. Another is Love, Medicine and Miracles. Now we come to terrific traps. Not terrible, terrific. They look great, and yet they are traps. And what are those? Those are things like, you see, feeling that now that I have sacrificed so much of ordinary worldly progress, I'm entitled to very rapid entitlement, a rapid spiritual growth. So, start feeling that now I must have it, and therefore they start being in a hurry. Now that can become a trap because there is no shortcut on the spiritual path. It will take its time. So while sincerity is good, the intensity of aspiration is good, the aspiration has to be patient and calm. Secondly, many other things can delude the person that I am making a lot of spiritual progress, whereas those things have nothing to do with spiritual progress. Things like getting a vision or a so-called spiritual experience, they start talking about it widely, which should never be done. Because Those are again milestones on the way. They have to be taken relatively lightly. Uh, and especially by talking about them too widely, one can dissipate in a moment all the gain that has been built up over years. And therefore, that injunction that one should not talk about personal visions and spiritual experiences in general. There are exceptions, but then those we can see sometime later. But in general, that should not be done. Then, many activities which the person feels are a good sort of indication of spiritual progress, and they start indulging in those. Like, you say, trying to tell others in their future, astrology, all these things get mixed up with spirituality. Trying to forecast the future for others, or attending a lot of spiritual talks, attending every possible spiritual retreat that they come to know of, reading every spiritual book that they can lay hands on. And they feel that by doing all this, they are progressing. All these things have nothing to do with progress. Progress firstly comes by the deepening of this type of knowledge rather than just accumulating more and more facts in your head. And secondly, putting it into practice. Now, all that takes time, and therefore, these can be only traps. We'll not go much into them, but then these sort of fireworks or of the path of spirituality can be very fascinating, but spiritual progress is not something which is so visible or will come through this type of things, or say, observing too many fasts, going on fasts and indulging in all types of ascetic practices. That can be another trap. I can live without food for so long. I don't need a comfortable bed. I can not only sleep on the floor, I can also sleep on a bed of nails. Now, all those are traps which make a person feel that, yes, now I have made a lot of spiritual progress, but these things have nothing to do with spiritual progress. They can sometimes be, in fact, an egoistic boast rather than an indicator or a means of spiritual progress. So, on this, again, for recapitulation, it sums up the process that we have been talking about. The person is on a journey. Life is like a journey. And the vehicle that a person has for going towards the goal of life is life itself. And of course, there can be good vehicles and bad vehicles. But any vehicle is good enough for going towards the goal, provided one knows how to use it. But then while going towards the goal, the path is not straight. There are many crossroads, which means there are many choices to be made, and the person can make those choices at the level of the emotions, the intellect, or the soul, the spokesperson of which is the psychic being. Now, depending upon the choice that the person makes, the person goes by the straight route or goes by a zigzag path. Not only the path becomes zigzag and longer every time the person makes a choice at the level of the emotional part of the being or the intellect, the person also gets a different type of scenery, which means the person gets a different set of conditions and circumstances for continuing towards the goal of life. So, in other words, the person also is rewriting his own destiny, because the conditions and circumstances which we get are the destiny. The person is rewriting his destiny, at least through the major choices that the person is making. And if the person uses these experiences well, that is the experience of following the dictates of the psychic being or not following the dictates of the psychic being, one reflects over the consequences of both types of choices, the emotional part of the being and the intellect start getting transformed, and gradually their choice starts converging with the choice of the soul. The emotional part of the being can see genuine peace by following the same type of choices as the psychic being does, and the intellect starts inventing reasons to support those choices, and this convergence or this transformation has been indicated by these dotted lines issuing from the emotions and the intellect. So this is how the journey can continue, and with good luck the person takes a significant number of steps at a good pace towards the goal, but very few of us are able to walk the entire path, complete the journey in a single lifetime, and therefore the journey continues from life to life. And that's why Sri Aurobindo says that if we all have the same destiny, that is to reach the same goal, and most of us do not reach that goal in this life, then coming back to the world, being reborn, the soul embodying itself once more becomes a rational necessity. What is most important is that we should have an aim in life, we should have a goal that we can clearly visualize, because an aimless life is always a miserable life. And the mother goes on to say that on the quality of your aim will depend the quality of your life. What type of an aim should we then have? The aim should be high and wide, generous and disinterested. High and wide, that is union with the divine. Generous to all those around us, which automatically happens as we are on that path. And disinterested, that is looking beyond our personal interest, looking beyond our little self, the needs of the little self at the level of the body and the mind. This will make your life precious to yourselves, because then the life would be well used, and to others, to the others around us. They'll also grow spiritually through these interactions with us, and of course their life will become a little sweeter, a little more pleasant. So that's how the life will become precious to us and to others around us. Now a few questions. Ego, the much maligned ego, is rooted in ignorance. Yes, it is, because the deeper truths of existence would help us realize oneness rather than the separation, which is a basic characteristic of the ego. Ego is an unmixed obstacle on the spiritual path. No, it's not an unmixed obstacle. In fact, in the early stages and till quite a late stage on the spiritual path also, it is in fact a helper. So the ego can be a helper, and ego can be the bar, as Sri Aurobindo has said. Till quite a late stage, it is in fact a helper. It's only when we find that our possessions and relationships start becoming an obstacle that the time comes for eliminating the ego. So it's not an unmixed obstacle. The ego has to be tolerated. No, it doesn't just have to be tolerated as a necessary evil. It can be very helpful, even on the spiritual path. Ego should be killed. No, it should not be killed, because it is required, and in any case it cannot be easily killed. It has a tendency to persist. So the right alternative is it is rooted in ignorance. Obstacles on the spiritual path may include reading scriptures regularly. Yes, mechanical reading of the scripture regularly can itself create that illusion that it is because of that I will continue to progress, but then that is neither necessary nor sufficient. Attending spiritual retreats, the same applies to that. Doing social work, again, it is the motive that matters, not the work that we are doing. If the motive is spiritual growth, we understand the whole thing behind it, that what is guaranteed through this social work is my spiritual growth. Yes, the lives of others may become a little more pleasant, a little more smooth. They may develop a little greater confidence in the goodness in the world. All that is there. But then problems don't get solved by social work. And therefore, if the motive is to solve a problem, one is likely to be disappointed. And if the motive is to gain a certain standing in the society as a good person, then of course, instead of spiritual progress, it could lead to even a spiritual decline, because then the motive becomes entirely egoistic. All of the above? Yes, all the above can be obstacles on the spiritual path. So obstacles on the spiritual path may include reading scriptures regularly, attending spiritual retreats, social work, all the three, and therefore the correct alternative is all of the above. Assertion: the family of a person on the spiritual path may consider him stupid. The reason? They are themselves stupid. No, they are not stupid. They are very intelligent. They are using the intellect. which has a tendency to calculate. So they can see what this person is losing in terms of money or time or something else essential. And that is why they consider him stupid. But they're not stupid. It's just that they can only calculate what one is gaining at the level of the intellect. They can't see the joy, the peace, and the change in the level of consciousness which this person is achieving. They can't see it. But that doesn't make them stupid. So assertion is a true statement. They may consider him stupid, that is true, but the reason is false. They are not themselves stupid. Assertion. One should not get married. Marriage can be an obstacle on the spiritual path. Yes, marriage can be an obstacle on the spiritual path. That is not enough reason for not getting married at all. If that was so, then all those who get married would automatically get disqualified from making any spiritual progress. So assertion is a false statement. Reason is true. Yes, it can be. But then no matter what type of marriage one has, successful or unsuccessful, happy or unhappy, it can become an opportunity for spiritual growth. Children are an obstacle on the spiritual path. Okay, marriage may be okay, but children certainly, they take away all our time and energy. Life revolves around children for 20, 30 years of your life. Such a waste of time, no? But because you do it, then have them, therefore you have to fulfill your responsibility. No, they are not an obstacle on the spiritual path. They give us an opportunity for spiritual growth because they need exactly what the parents can give. Childcare leaves no time and energy for spiritual pursuits. Taking care of them itself is a spiritual pursuit. May not be the only pursuit, may not be lifelong. The sphere of love should be wider than the children, but children are also an excellent opportunity. So assertion is a false statement. They are not an obstacle. Reason given is also false. They may not leave much time and energy for spiritual pursuits, but taking care of them is itself a spiritual pursuit, and therefore reason is also false. Now here is a beautiful sentence from a parent in a letter to his daughter. You have taught me the meaning of unconditional love. Because the rest of our love quite often tends to be conditional. If the person does this, or if the person is so good, if the person qualifies for my love, then only I love this person. It's children who teach us the meaning of unconditional love. Compassion, forgiveness. We forgive a child more easily than anybody else, perhaps. Acceptance, acceptance of the person as the person is, and letting go. Getting attached and also letting go. Both are involved in childcare. So you have taught me the meaning of unconditional love, compassion, forgiveness, acceptance, and letting go. No person, or for that matter, no spiritual or self-help book has been able to teach me the above or inspire me to be a better person. Again, the same book, Understanding Spirituality, the purpose of life is a big chapter. It's available as an ebook on Amazon. For a hard copy, you may drop us an email, but not on this address. With this email address, we have run into some trouble, but we'll soon get back to you with a new email address. And the Life Divine and Savitri, of course, this knowledge is scattered throughout both these books very liberally and generously, and but some concentrated knowledge of what we have been talking about in the last few sessions is there in Book 1, Canto 4 of Savitri. And especially about what we talked today, you will find a very large number of essays in this book, Spiritual Wisdom in Small Doses, which is available for free download on our website, yesspirituality.wordpress.com. Gratitude to the Mother and Sri Aurobindo for making it all possible. And thank you all for listening.
Hello, good morning. Can you please explain the difference between a spiritual consciousness and mystic consciousness, please?
Spiritual consciousness or mystic consciousness, except that spiritual consciousness can mean various grades of spiritual consciousness, whereas mystic consciousness is a little more definite, that the person has actually achieved an identity with the divine. But again, that is an oversimplification, because even the mystic consciousness can have different varieties as well as grades. As you know, Sri Aurobindo has brought out in the Life Divine, that it could be just an intuitive mind, or it could be uh, or it could be an overmind. So, I mean, there will be different grades of mystic consciousness. So, mystic consciousness itself can also have gradations, varying from the intuitive mind, supermind, to the overmind to the supermind. But spiritual consciousness would be even wider. It may cover even levels like the higher mind and the illumined mind.
Can we say spiritual? Sorry. Can we say mystic consciousness belongs with the psychic being develop an individual uh, path, and spiritual is cosmic or more, I don't know how I can say, bigger, supramental.
No, neither of these would uh, be say synonym for supramental consciousness, and because supramental consciousness is something which is by and large still a concept which is difficult to understand. Why I'm saying it's difficult to understand is because it has deluded even the mystics. uh, it's a principle that has been brought on this planet, but it has deluded even the mystics by and large, and that is why it's difficult to understand. One way it is expressed is that why it is difficult to understand is that suppose uh, we were having a conference of monkeys. The monkeys had a conference, and they were told that there will be a creature later who will be far better than you, unimaginably better than you. Still the monkeys would try to make an effort to imagine what that creature may be like. What would they think? They would visualize that if I can jump 100 feet, that perhaps creature will be able to jump 1,000 feet at a time. Now, that is how he would think. He would not be able to imagine that the creature far superior to the monkey would be able to have computers and the internet. That is not what the monkeys. So, in the same way, uh, the human beings so far have been at a level of consciousness where it is difficult for them to even visualize what supramental consciousness will be like. And because that has deluded by and large even the mystics.
Yes, if I understood, we only can make an inference about supramental because it's out of our mental
Yes,
possibilities.
right. So a mental view of supramental is likely to be always erroneous.
Thank you.
Tomorrow is Monica.
So, as there are no more questions, we come to the end of yet another session. Tomorrow, we will have a guest session by Miss Monica on how to make asanas injury proof. And I've also shared the link in the drive of the drive in the chat box. If you have missed, you can watch that video. And please be present tomorrow. We end with the music. Thank you, everyone.